People always say family gatherings bring everyone together, but sometimes they just show you how alone you really are. I smoothed down my navy blue dress, the one with the silver buttons I would been saving for something special. Made his favorite lemon squares from scratch, even polished the pearl earrings Robert gave me for our 40th anniversary. But when I walked into that reception hall and saw every table filled except for the one tucked behind a pillar where they would place my name card, I understood. Something fundamental had shifted, and that moment would reshape everything I thought I knew about my life. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family story? Hit that heart if this resonates, and share in the comments what lesson life taught you about standing up for yourself. Your story might help another woman find her voice. And don't forget to follow her light for more real stories about women reclaiming their power. Coastal Virginia moves with a rhythm all its own in early autumn. The salt air carries both promise and melancholy, especially when you are living alone in a house that once held 2 heartbeats. My cottage sits 3 blocks from the Chesapeake Bay, white clapboard siding weathered silver by decades of storms. I have called it home for 43 years, but since Robert passed 2 summers ago, even familiar walls feel different. My name is Eleanor Walsh, and at 68, I wake each morning to silence that used to be conversation. The house still smells faintly of Robert's coffee, though I have switched to tea. His reading glasses remain on the kitchen windowsill where he left them, folded beside a paperback novel he will never finish. Some mornings, I catch myself setting 2 cups on the counter before remembering. My days have found their own gentle pattern. I tend the small herb garden behind the kitchen, deadhead the roses that climb the fence, and walk down to check the mailbox even when I know nothing important will arrive. The neighborhood is quiet now, filled mostly with retirees, like myself, and young families who wave politely but rarely stop to chat. Everyone seems to be moving towards something or away from something. I am learning to simply be still. Marcus calls every few weeks, usually on Sunday evenings when his schedule permits. He is 34 now, works in finance in Richmond, drives a BMW that cost more than Robert and I spent on our first house. His voice sounds efficient on the phone, like he is checking items off a list. We discuss the weather, my blood pressure medication, whether I need anything from the grocery store. He means well, I tell myself. Young people today are just busier than we used to be. Last month, Marcus called on a Tuesday, which broke his usual pattern. His voice carried an excitement I hadn't heard in years, the kind that reminded me of when he was 12 and discovered he would made the baseball team. He was getting married, he said. Her name was Jessica. She worked in marketing. They would been dating for 8 months. The wedding would be in December, something elegant but intimate. I asked about her family, whether they would met yet, what kind of flowers she liked. Marcus laughed that quick, distracted laugh he would developed in college, said Jessica had everything under control, that she was incredibly organized. Then he mentioned they were thinking of having the ceremony at the Williamsburg Inn, something classic and sophisticated. I offered to help with planning, maybe contribute to the flowers or coordinate the guest book. There was a pause on the line, the kind that stretches too long and says more than words. Marcus cleared his throat and said they would hire a wedding planner, someone who specialized in upscale events. Everything was handled. I asked if there was anything at all I could do, even something small. He said, not to worry about it, that I should just focus on finding a nice dress and enjoying the day. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my hand still on the receiver. The conversation felt polished, like he would rehearsed it. I wondered when I would become someone who needed to be managed rather than included. But I pushed that thought away, telling myself I was being oversensitive. This was his moment, his choice. My role was to be supportive and grateful to be included at all. I spent the following weeks preparing carefully, found a dress at the department store in town, navy blue with silver buttons, and a modest neckline that felt appropriate for a mother of the groom. Had my hair styled at the salon where I would been going for 15 years, asked for something elegant but not too formal. Even bought new shoes, low heels that wouldn't catch on tablecloth edges or make me feel unsteady on unfamiliar floors. The morning of the wedding, I pressed the dress again, checked my makeup twice, and drove the hour-and-a-half to Williamsburg with classical music playing softly on the radio. The inn was beautiful, all brick and ivy and colonial charm. Valet parking, doormen in uniform, the kind of place that appeared in magazine spreads about perfect weddings. Inside, the lobby buzzed with well-dressed guests, everyone seeming to know exactly where they belonged. I approached the reception table where a young woman with a clipboard and a bright smile handed me a name tag. Just Eleanor Walsh in simple black print. No indication that I was the groom's mother. No special designation. The bride's family members wore small gold pins with their table numbers. The groomsmen had boutonnieres with silver ribbon. I had a sticky name tag. The ceremony space was decorated with white roses and silver candles. Everything tasteful and expensive. I was seated in the third row behind people I didn't recognize. The first 2 rows were reserved for immediate family, but somehow I didn't qualify for that designation. Marcus looked handsome in his charcoal gray suit, standing at the altar with confidence I would always admired. Jessica was lovely, her dress clearly designer, her smile radiant for the photographer who captured every moment during the service. They exchanged personal vows they would written themselves. Marcus spoke about finding his perfect partner, about building a future with someone who shared his ambitions and values. Jessica talked about choosing love every day, about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who elevate your dreams. Neither mentioned family, tradition, or the people who had supported them before they found each other. The words were beautiful, but felt disconnected from anything I recognized about the boy I would raise. At the reception, I found my assigned table near the back corner, between the restrooms and the service station, where waiters collected dirty dishes. My table mates were pleasant enough. A college friend of Jessica's, a neighbor of her parents, someone who worked with Marcus but had never heard my name mentioned. They made polite conversation about the flowers and the food, but it was clear I was as much a stranger to them as they were to me. The dinner was served in courses, each plate artfully arranged and completely unfamiliar to me. I smiled and nodded through discussions of wine pairings and weekend homes in the Hamptons. When the toasts began, Jessica's father spoke eloquently about gaining a son. Her maid of honor shared funny stories about their college adventures. Marcus's best friend from work made jokes about golf games and business trips. No one called upon the groom's mother to share memories or offer blessings. No one acknowledged the woman who had stayed up all night when Marcus had pneumonia at age 6, who had driven to Richmond at midnight, when his car broke down sophomore year, who had celebrated every small victory and worried through every setback. I sat quietly, hands folded, wondering when I had become so peripheral to his story. When the dancing began, Marcus danced with Jessica, then with her mother, then with several of her friends and relatives. I waited, adjusting my necklace, smoothing my skirt, thinking surely he would remember. The band played 3 songs, then 4, then 5. Other mothers were invited onto the floor, by their sons. Other family members embraced and laughed and created moments the photographer captured with obvious joy. I excused myself to the ladies' room, not because I needed to go, but because sitting still and smiling was becoming painful. In the mirror, I looked like exactly what I was, an older woman in a nice dress that no one would remember. When I returned to my table, dessert had been served, a small slice of wedding cake, elegant and sweet, that I ate mechanically while watching my son celebrate the beginning of his new life. The evening ended without goodbye. Marcus was busy with farewell hugs and yas to the important guests. I gathered my purse, left my cloth napkin folded beside my plate, and walked to the valet station alone. The young man brought my car quickly, probably grateful to move one of the older, less impressive vehicles out of the lot. I drove home in darkness, the radio off, processing what I would experienced. It wasn't until I was back in my own kitchen, hanging up my good dress, that I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. I hadn't just been overlooked or forgotten. I had been systematically excluded from my own son's most important day. Not by accident, not by oversight, but by design. Someone had made deliberate choices about my role, my placement, my significance, and that someone had decided I didn't matter very much at all. 2 weeks passed before Marcus called. His voice carried the relaxed satisfaction of someone returning from a successful honeymoon. He asked how I was feeling, mentioned that several people had complimented the wedding, said Jessica was already talking about hosting Thanksgiving. Then, almost as an afterthought, he suggested we have dinner soon. Just the two of us, he said, so we could catch up properly. I agreed, though something in his tone made me cautious. There was a carefulness there, a measured quality that reminded me of how he used to sound when he wanted to borrow the car in high school. We arranged to meet at his house the following Saturday evening. He said Jessica would be visiting her sister, so we would have plenty of time to talk. The drive to Richmond felt longer than usual, though traffic was light. Marcus lived in a new development called Riverside Estates, where every house looked expensive and every lawn looked professionally maintained. His home was brick and stone, with a 3-car garage and security system panel visible through the front window. When he answered the door, he seemed genuinely happy to see me, hugging me more warmly than he had at the wedding. Inside, everything was tasteful and coordinated. Hardwood floors, granite countertops, furniture that looked like it had come from a showroom, rather than accumulated over time. He offered me wine, asked about my drive, complimented the sweater I was wearing. The conversation felt easier than our recent phone calls, more like the relationship we used to have. He led me to the dining room, where he would set the table for two with what looked like their wedding china. But instead of dinner, there was only a manila folder placed beside my plate, along with the expensive-looking pen still in its box. Marcus poured wine into my glass, then his own, and sat down across from me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mom," he began, using a tone I recognized from childhood when he was about to ask for something he wasn't sure. He deserved. Jessica and I have been talking about planning for the future, making sure all our affairs are in order. He gestured toward the folder with the casual confidence of someone who expected cooperation. "We think it would be smart for you to have some legal protections in place. You know, in case anything happens to your health, or if you need help managing things." I opened the folder carefully, though my hands had begun to tremble slightly. The documents inside were professionally prepared, with tabs and highlighted signature lines. Powers of attorney. The headers read, Durable Financial Management Authorization. Healthcare Decision Authority. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the basic message was clear. Marcus would have complete control over my money, my property, my medical care, and essentially every important decision in my life. "It is just a precaution," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the patient tone people use when explaining something to someone they consider not quite capable of understanding. "Everyone our age is doing this kind of planning. Jessica's parents just set up something similar with her brother. It is the responsible thing to do." I looked up at him. This man I had raised from infancy, whose fevers I had monitored, and whose homework I had supervised, and whose college tuition I had paid by working double shifts at the hospital, where I would been a nurse for 30 years. He was watching me with the expression of someone waiting for a signature on a routine document. "Why the rush?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "I am only 68. I am healthy. My mind is clear." Marcus shifted in his chair, glancing toward the kitchen as if checking to make sure we were alone. "It is not about rushing, Mom. It is about being prepared. You know how quickly things can change at your age." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "And honestly, some of us have noticed you seem a little overwhelmed lately. Forgetting things, repeating yourself on the phone." I stared at him, genuinely confused. I hadn't forgotten anything significant in months. My memory was as sharp as it had ever been. I balanced my checkbook to the penny, managed my medications without assistance, maintained my house and garden without help. What things have I forgotten? "Well," Marcus said, reaching for his wine glass. "You mentioned the same story about Mrs. Patterson's cat twice during our last conversation. And when I called 2 weeks ago, you seemed confused about what day it was." I remembered the conversation clearly. Mrs. Patterson's cat had been missing and then found. And I would mentioned it because Marcus used to enjoy that cat when he was young. As for being confused about the day, I would been in the garden when he called and had simply asked him to repeat what day he was planning to visit, because I would missed it the first time. "Marcus," I said carefully, "I think there might be some misunderstanding about my mental state." He leaned forward, taking on what I recognized as his professional persona. "The thing is, Mom, by the time these kinds of problems become obvious, it is often too late to set up proper legal protections. The courts require mental competency for these documents to be valid. If we wait until there is a real issue, we will not be able to help you." There was logic in what he was saying, but something felt fundamentally wrong about the entire conversation. The timing, the setting, the way he would excluded dinner and focused entirely on paperwork. The way he would mention problems with my memory that I knew didn't exist. The way he kept referring to we and us as if decisions about my life were naturally his to make. "I would like to take these home and review them," I said, closing the folder. "Maybe have someone explain the legal implications." Marcus's expression shifted slightly, a flash of something that looked like annoyance before he recovered his patient smile. "Of course," he said, "but you should know that the attorney who prepared these specializes in elder law. He has already reviewed everything and confirmed it is standard language. There is really nothing complicated about it." "Still," I said, standing and tucking the folder under my arm, "I would feel more comfortable having my own review process." Marcus stood too, walking me toward the front door with what felt like barely contained impatience. "Just don't wait too long," he said, his voice carrying a subtle edge. "These things work best when they are put in place proactively." The drive home felt different than the drive there. The familiar road seemed to stretch longer, and the streetlights cast sharper shadows. I kept replaying the conversation, trying to understand when my son had started viewing me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. When had my independence become something that needed to be managed? Back in my cottage, I sat at the kitchen table with the folder still closed in front of me. The house felt smaller than usual, as if the walls had moved closer while I was away. I thought about calling someone, but who? Most of my close friends were dealing with their own aging parents or health issues. My sister lived in Florida and had her own complications with her children. I realized that somewhere over the years, my social circle had shrunk to a size that left me essentially alone with my own judgment. I opened the folder again and read through each document slowly. The language was complex, but the effect was simple. If I signed these papers, Marcus would have complete authority over every aspect of my life that mattered. He could sell my house, move my money, make my medical decisions, even determine where I lived. The documents included a clause about diminished capacity that could be triggered by something as subjective as concern about my judgment. What disturbed me most was the realization that this wasn't a spontaneous idea. These documents had been prepared by an attorney, reviewed, organized, and presented with a level of planning that suggested this conversation had been building for some time. Marcus and Jessica had discussed my future, consulted professionals, made decisions about my competency, and developed a strategy for managing me, all without my knowledge or input. I slept poorly that night, waking several times to check the clock and replay portions of the conversation. In the morning, I called the bank where I would done business for 20 years and asked about my accounts. Everything was exactly as I expected. Modest savings, reliable Social Security deposits, a small pension from the hospital. Nothing suggested I was incapable of managing my own affairs. Then I called my doctor's office and asked for copies of my recent test results. My blood pressure was well controlled. My cholesterol levels were good. My mammogram and bone density were normal for my age. When I would had my annual physical 2 months earlier, Dr. Reynolds had complimented me on how well I was maintaining my health. There was nothing in my medical records to suggest cognitive decline or incompetency. The more I reviewed my actual situation, the more Marcus's concerns seemed manufactured rather than genuine. I was a 68-year-old woman in good health, living independently, managing my affairs without assistance, and maintaining my property without help. The only thing that had changed was my marital status, and apparently, my value to my son. 3 days later, Marcus called. His voice had the determined cheerfulness of someone who had prepared talking points. He asked if I would had a chance to review the documents, mentioned that Jessica was excited about taking more active role in family planning, and suggested we meet again soon to finalize everything. I am still considering my options, I told him. There was a pause. What options, Mom? This is pretty straightforward. I might want to consult with my own attorney, I said. Get an independent perspective. The pause this time was longer. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had cooled considerably. I am not sure why you would need to do that. We are your family. We are trying to help you. I understand that, I said. But these are important decisions. I want to make sure I understand all the implications. The implications are that you will be protected, Marcus said. And for the first time, his patience seemed to be wearing thin. Look, Mom, I know change is hard at your age, but sometimes you have to trust that the people who care about you know what is best. At your age, the phrase hung in the air like a judgment, as if reaching 68 had automatically rendered me incapable of rational thought. I will call you when I have made my decision, I said. After hanging up, I sat in my living room looking out at the bay. The water was gray that day, choppy with whitecaps that appeared and disappeared with the wind. I thought about Robert, about what he would say if he could see what was happening. He had never liked confrontation, but he had strong opinions about fairness and respect. I thought he would be troubled by Marcus's approach, by the assumption that age automatically meant incompetence. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Patricia Hennessy. Patricia had been Robert's attorney, and before that, she would been our friend. We would lost touch after Robert's death, the way people sometimes do when their connection was primarily through someone else. But I remembered her as someone who listened carefully and spoke plainly. Qualities I needed desperately. Patricia's voice was warm when she recognized my name. We exchanged the usual pleasantries about health and weather, and then I explained why I was calling. She listened without interrupting, asking only occasional clarifying questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Eleanor, she said finally, I would like you to come to my office. Bring those documents, and bring anything else you might have. Bank statements, medical records, anything that shows your current situation. Do you think I am overreacting? I asked. I think you are being careful, she said. And I think that is exactly what you should be doing. Patricia's office was in a restored Victorian house downtown, all hardwood floors and tall windows. She was in her early 70s now, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a navy suit that suggested she was still very much in practice. She offered me tea, asked about my health, and then examined the documents Marcus had given me with the methodical attention of someone who had seen similar papers many times before. These are very comprehensive, she said after several minutes, and very aggressive. What do you mean by aggressive? The scope of authority is unusually broad. Most families use much narrower language, focusing on specific circumstances or requiring multiple triggering events. This would give Marcus complete control immediately upon signing, with very few protections for you. She walked me through each section, explaining in plain language what I would be giving up: the right to make my own financial decisions, the right to choose my own living situation, the right to make my own medical choices, even the right to revoke the agreement that would require Marcus's consent or a court order. It is also unusual for these kinds of documents to be presented as urgent when there is no apparent crisis. Patricia continued. Most responsible adult children raise these issues gradually, involve the parent in the planning process, and suggest much more limited initial arrangements. So Marcus is being unreasonable. Patricia set the papers aside and looked at me directly. Marcus is being strategic. This isn't about protecting you, Eleanor. This is about controlling you. And I suspect it is about controlling something specific. I felt my stomach tighten. Like what? Like assets you might have that he is concerned about accessing or inheriting. Is there anything about your financial situation that Marcus might not fully understand? I thought about Robert's life insurance, about the modest savings we would accumulated, about the house that was now worth considerably more than we would paid for it decades earlier. Nothing seemed significant enough to justify Marcus's urgency. Nothing substantial, I said. Just the usual things you would expect. Patricia nodded, but her expression suggested she was thinking about something I might not have considered. Eleanor, when did Robert die? And what arrangements did he make for his estate? 2 years ago this past summer. He left everything to me, of course. The house, his pension, some savings. Nothing complicated. Did he have life insurance, investment accounts, anything managed by other institutions? I mentioned the life insurance policy, which had paid out $25,000. Patricia made notes, asking about the insurance company, the policy number, whether there had been any other benefits I might not have been aware of. I would like to make some inquiries, she said. With your permission, I would like to contact the insurance company and check whether there might be other policies or benefits you weren't notified about. Sometimes these things get overlooked in the immediate aftermath of a death. I gave her permission, though I couldn't imagine what she might discover. Robert had been methodical about paperwork, and I would been through all his files multiple times. But Patricia had an authority that made me trust her instincts, even when I didn't understand her reasoning. In the meantime, she said, I am going to prepare some alternative documents for you, a limited power of attorney that would give Marcus access to help you in a genuine emergency, but would preserve your autonomy and require medical certification of incapacity before broader powers could take effect. What should I tell Marcus? Tell him you are consulting with an attorney and will get back to him soon. Don't elaborate, and Eleanor. She paused, fixing me with a direct look. Don't sign anything until we finish our review, no matter how much pressure he applies. Driving home, I felt simultaneously relieved and apprehensive. Patricia had confirmed my instincts about Marcus's documents, but she would also suggested there might be things about my situation I didn't understand. The idea that Robert might have left benefits I wasn't aware of seemed unlikely, but Patricia's certainty made me wonder what I might have missed. That evening, I went through Robert's papers again. This time, more systematically. His desk drawers, the filing cabinet in the basement, the box of important documents we would kept in the bedroom closet. Most of what I found was familiar. Tax returns, medical records, warranties for appliances, correspondence with the pension system. But in the very back of the filing cabinet, I found a manila envelope I would overlooked before. It was sealed, with my name written across the front in Robert's careful handwriting. Inside was a letter and several official-looking documents from financial institutions I didn't recognize. The letter was dated just 3 months before Robert's death. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you are going through papers I hoped you would never need to see. I have kept some financial arrangements private, not because I wanted to hide anything from you, but because I wanted to protect you from worrying about things I could handle myself. Over the years, I invested in several accounts that have grown beyond what I expected. There are also benefits from my military service that you are entitled to, and a small inheritance from my father's estate that was held in trust until my death. I have arranged everything so that you will be comfortable and independent for the rest of your life. You will not need to depend on anyone or accept anyone's judgment about your capabilities. You will not need to compromise your dignity or your autonomy. The documents in this envelope will explain how to access everything. Take them to Patricia Hennessy. I have already spoken with her about this, and she knows what to do. Don't tell Marcus about this immediately, not because I don't trust him, but because money changes relationships in ways that cannot be undone. You will know when and how to share this information. You were the love of my life and my closest friend. I want you to live the rest of your life on your own terms. All my love, Robert. I read the letter twice, then examined the documents. Investment account statements, military benefit notifications, trust fund disbursements. The numbers were larger than anything I would ever imagined. Not just thousands, but hundreds of thousands. One account alone contained over $2 million. I sat on the bedroom floor with papers spread around me, trying to process what Robert had done. He would not only provided for my security, he would given me complete financial independence. I could live comfortably for the rest of my life without needing help from anyone. I could travel, donate to causes I cared about, help others if I chose to. I could make my own decisions about everything because I wasn't dependent on anyone else's generosity or judgment. More importantly, I understood now why Marcus was so eager to gain control of my affairs. Somehow, he would become aware that I had assets beyond what was obvious. Maybe through insurance company communications, maybe through county records when he would help me with property tax questions, maybe through banking connections in his professional network. However he would learned about it, he would decided to position himself to manage what he probably assumed was a modest inheritance. What he didn't know was that Robert had been smarter and more protective than either of us had realized. The next morning, I called Patricia's office first thing and scheduled an emergency appointment. When I arrived, she took one look at my face and ushered me directly into her office. "You found something," she said. I handed her Robert's letter and the accompanying documents. She read everything carefully, made some phone calls to verify account numbers and balances, and then sat back in her chair with the expression that managed to be both satisfied and concerned. "Robert was very thorough," she said, "and very smart. He not only provided for your security, he structured everything to protect you from exactly the kind of manipulation Marcus is attempting." The total value of what Robert had left me was just over $3 million, distributed across multiple accounts and investments designed to provide steady income while preserving principal. There were also military survivor benefits I would never applied for, worth several $100,000 over my lifetime. "What do I do now?" I asked. Patricia spent the next hour explaining my options. I could maintain the status quo and simply tell Marcus I would decided not to sign his power of attorney. I could reveal my financial situation and make it clear that his documents were unnecessary. Or I could take a more strategic approach, one that would protect me not just from Marcus's current behavior, but from any future attempts to manipulate or control me. "I recommend the strategic approach," Patricia said, "because this probably will not be the last time he tries something like this." Over the next week, Patricia helped me reorganize my entire financial situation. We consolidated the accounts Robert had left me, established a trust that would protect the assets from any future legal challenges, and created new estate planning documents that ensured my autonomy while providing clear inheritance instructions. Most importantly, we prepared a comprehensive response to Marcus's power of attorney request, one that would make it clear I was not only competent to manage my own affairs, but that I had taken steps to ensure no one else would ever be able to override my decisions. When we finished, I had legal documentation of my financial stability, medical certification of my mental competency, and ironclad legal protections that would prevent anyone from challenging my autonomy. I also had something I hadn't possessed in months: the confidence that comes from knowing you are not dependent on anyone else's approval or support. 2 weeks after my meeting with Patricia, I called Marcus and asked him to come to my house for dinner. Not to his house, where he controlled the environment and agenda, but to my home, where I could manage the conversation on my terms. He arrived on time, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the casual confidence of someone who expected to finalize a successful negotiation. I would prepare his favorite meal, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the same dinner I would made for his birthday every year when he was growing up. But I would also set out a manila folder beside his plate, one considerably thicker than the documents he would given me. "Mom," he said, settling into his chair with a smile. "I am glad you decided to move forward with this. Jessica was just saying how much easier it will be to help you once we have the proper legal framework in place." I served dinner and made pleasant conversation about his work, Jessica's adjustment to married life, their plans for the holidays. Marcus seemed relaxed, probably assuming that my invitation meant I would decide to cooperate with his plans. When we finished eating, I cleared the plates and returned to the table with coffee and the folder. Marcus glanced at it expectantly, probably thinking I would brought out his power of attorney documents for signing. "Marcus," I said, opening the folder and removing several official-looking documents, "I have spent considerable time reviewing your power of attorney proposal. I have also consulted with an attorney and done some financial planning of my own." His expression shifted slightly, from expectation to wariness. "That is good, Mom. I am glad you are taking this seriously." "I am taking it seriously," I agreed. "Which is why I have decided not to sign your documents." Marcus set down his coffee cup with a small clink against the saucer. "Mom, I thought we discussed this. You need these protections." "Actually," I said, sliding a document across the table to him. "I don't. The paper was a financial statement prepared by Patricia's office, showing my assets, income, and projected financial security." Marcus glanced at it, then looked more closely, his eyes widening as he processed the numbers. "I don't understand," he said. "Where did this come from?" I explained about Robert's letter, about the accounts and benefits I would discovered, about the financial independence I would inherited, but hadn't been aware of. As I spoke, Marcus's expression changed from confusion to something sharper, calculation mixed with disappointment. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" he asked. "Because Robert advised me not to," I said simply, "and because your behavior over the past few weeks has shown me why he was right to be cautious." I handed him another document, the revocable trust Patricia had helped me establish, which protected my assets from any legal challenges and ensured that my decisions about my money, my health, and my living situation would remain mine alone. "I don't need anyone to manage my affairs," I continued. "I don't need protection from my own supposed incompetence. What I needed was protection from people who would try to take advantage of what they assumed was my vulnerability." Marcus stared at the papers, his face cycling through emotions I could read clearly: disappointment, frustration, and beneath it all, a cold anger that he was trying to control. "This is ridiculous," he said finally. "You are 68 years old. You shouldn't be making these kinds of decisions alone." "I am not alone," I said. "I have excellent legal counsel, a trusted financial advisor, and complete documentation of my competency. What I don't have is any need for someone else to make my decisions for me." Marcus pushed back from the table, his hands clenched into fists. "You are making a mistake. You are letting paranoia and pride put you at risk." "The only risk I was at," I said calmly, "was from someone who wanted to control my life for their own benefit." He left that night without saying goodbye, taking his wine but leaving behind the folder with all the financial documents I would shown him. I cleaned up the dinner dishes slowly. Not because I was sad, but because I wanted to savor the feeling of having reclaimed my own life. 3 days later, I received a letter from Marcus's attorney, not the elder law specialist who had prepared the power of attorney documents, but a different lawyer with a more aggressive approach. The letter suggested that my refusal to accept family assistance indicated diminished judgment, and that legal steps might be necessary to protect my welfare. I forwarded the letter to Patricia, who responded with her own letter within 24 hours. Her response was concise and devastating. Documentation of my financial competency, medical clearance from my physician, and a clear statement that any attempt to challenge my legal autonomy would be met with vigorous legal defense and potential charges of elder abuse. Marcus's attorney never wrote again. For several weeks I heard nothing from Marcus at all. The silence was initially uncomfortable. I would grown accustomed to his regular phone calls, even when they felt dutiful rather than affectionate. But gradually, the quiet began to feel like relief rather than abandonment. I used the time to make changes I would been considering for months. I hired a housekeeper to help with deep cleaning, not because I couldn't manage it myself, but because I wanted to spend my time on activities I enjoyed more. I joined a book club at the library, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center. Most importantly, I began to rebuild connections I would allowed to fade. I called old friends from my nursing days, reached out to neighbors I would only exchanged pleasantries with, and accepted invitations I might previously have declined. I realized that my social isolation hadn't been the inevitable result of widowhood. It had been the gradual result of allowing my relationship with Marcus to substitute for a broader community. 6 weeks after our confrontation, Marcus called. His voice was different, not angry, but subdued in a way that suggested the intervening time had given him perspective he hadn't possessed before. "Mom," he said, "I owe you an apology." I waited, not making it easier for him, but not making it harder either. "I was wrong about the power of attorney thing. I was wrong about your competency, and I was wrong about your need for protection." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a vulnerability I hadn't heard since he was a child. "I guess I was worried about losing you the way we lost Dad, and I thought controlling things would somehow prevent that. Fear can make us do things that aren't actually protective," I said. "Yeah," he agreed. "And I think maybe I was also worried about the inheritance situation, about whether you would have enough money, about whether I would need to help support you financially." Finding out about Dad's planning was a relief, but it was also embarrassing, like I would been preparing for a crisis that didn't exist. It was the closest he would come to acknowledging what had really motivated his urgency about the power of attorney. Not concern for my welfare, but anxiety about his own future obligations. "What now?" I asked. "I would like to try again," Marcus said. "As your son, not as your financial manager. If you are willing," we began slowly. Marcus visited every few weeks, but without agenda or paperwork. We took walks along the bay, had dinner at restaurants I chose, talked about books and current events, rather than my medical condition or financial planning. Jessica joined us occasionally, and I began to see glimpses of why Marcus had fallen in love with her. She was intelligent and funny when she wasn't trying to manage family dynamics. I never told Marcus the full extent of Robert's financial planning, and he never asked for details beyond what I chose to share. The money became something that provided security and independence, rather than a source of conflict or negotiation. More importantly, I had learned something about myself that I would needed to understand. I was not someone who required protection from my own judgment. I was not someone who needed to accept other people's definitions of my capabilities. I was not someone who had to choose between family relationships and personal autonomy. 6 months later, I sold the cottage in Virginia and moved to a smaller house near Asheville, North Carolina. Not because I was having difficulty maintaining my home, but because I wanted to live somewhere with mountains instead of ocean. Somewhere I could hike and explore and meet new people who would know me as Eleanor rather than as Marcus's aging mother. Marcus helped me move, driving the rental truck and carrying boxes without complaint. When we finished unloading everything, he stood in my new living room looking around at the unfamiliar space. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "I am sure," I said. "This is what I want." He nodded, and I could see that he was learning to trust my decisions even when they weren't what he would choose for me. I am 70 now, and I wake up each morning in a house that is exactly the right size for my life, in a town where I know my neighbors and have work that matters to me. I volunteer at the local hospice, teach literacy classes at the community college, and maintain a garden that produces enough vegetables to share with everyone on my street. Marcus visits several times a year, and we talk on the phone every week. Our relationship isn't the same as it was before. There is a respectful distance now that acknowledges we are both adults with our own lives to manage. But it is honest in a way it wasn't before, and that honesty has made affection possible again. Sometimes people ask me how I knew to protect myself from my own son's manipulation. The answer is that I didn't know. Not at first. I just knew that something felt wrong about being managed instead of being respected, and I was fortunate enough to have resources, financial, legal, and emotional, that allowed me to resist pressure that might have overwhelmed someone with fewer options. But the most important resource I had wasn't money or legal counsel. It was the willingness to believe that my own judgment was worth defending, even when someone I loved was telling me it wasn't. Robert's gift wasn't just financial security. It was the confirmation that someone who knew me well believed I was capable of making my own decisions for the rest of my life. And once I believed that about myself, no one else's opinion could shake that foundation. What is your take on Eleanor's story? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, make sure to follow her light for more real stories about women finding their strength in unexpected moments. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear.